Here you are at last. I've been waiting for you, sitting here, alone, with only the crackling of the fire and the dancing shadows that sometimes seem to come to life. You've come for a thrill, haven't you? I must warn you, the stories I'm about to tell you are not the kind that are easily forgotten. They have the power to seep into your thoughts, to haunt your dreams. Each story is a portal to unexplored worlds, places where the border between the real and the unthinkable is as fine as a silk thread. Don't take this invitation lightly. What you're about to hear could well shake your certainties, make you doubt everything you thought you knew about the world and about yourself. The darkness holds secrets and mysteries so deep and ancient that even time seems to fear them. Are you ready to face it? To let its dark imprint mingle with your shadow? Breathe deeply and prepare yourself. Let the flames warm your body, but know that nothing can warm your soul to the thrill I'm about to give you. Each story is a journey from which you may not return unscathed. But if it's fear you're after, then, my dear visitor, you're exactly where you need to be. Ready to get started? One day, a family moves into an old house, seduced by its old-fashioned charm and isolation. The house, with its old woodwork and spacious rooms, seems the ideal refuge for Mark and Leah and their young daughter, Emily. But what they saw as a new page in their lives soon turns out to be a dark and terrifying chapter. Shortly after settling in, 6-year-old Emily speaks of an imaginary friend, a comforting presence as she adjusts to her new life. Her doting parents are not overly concerned by these childish tales until the first night of a thunderstorm. As lightning rips across the sky and thunder rumbles, Emily wakes up in the middle of the night, her room bathed in an unearthly light. Drawn by naive curiosity, she heads for the window and discovers, to her horror, a face. Not that of a child, or even a living human being, but a pale, deformed face, staring back at her intently. Terrified, Emily runs to her parents' bed, telling them about the face in the window. Mark, wanting to reassure his daughter, gets up to inspect, blaming the storm and his daughter's fertile imagination for what she claims to have seen. But of course, he finds nothing. The parents see nothing but the whims of a childish imagination. They try to reassure Emily that what she's seeing isn't real. But the fear in their daughter's eyes cannot be soothed by words. Emily becomes increasingly agitated, each stormy night terrifying her at the thought of seeing that face again. Tension mounts in the family, with sleepless nights piling up. Mark and Leah watch helplessly as their daughter slips away. They begin to question their decision to move into this house, but doubt turns to horror when they discover the truth about their new home. The mansion was once the scene of a tragedy. A young boy, the same age as Emily, had tragically lost his life when he fell from the window of what is now his bedroom. The revelation froze the blood of the parents, who realized too late that their daughter's warnings were cries for help. Tragedy strikes on a particularly stormy night. Emily was nowhere to be found. Her parents searched desperately for her, calling out her name in the dark, silent house. Then, too late, they find her at her bedroom window, staring blankly outwards. Before they can reach her, Emily whispers, "He wants me to join him," and driven by an invisible force, leaps into the void. Emily's death leaves her parents devastated, gnawed by guilt for not having believed their daughter's fears. The house, now haunted by two spirits, remains a place of mourning, a warning to all those who choose to ignore the voices of the innocent. Sarah crosses the threshold of her family's manor house. the unexpected heiress to this ancestral home, she is drawn to the mysteries of its past, hoping to find a new beginning far from the hustle and bustle of modern life. The mansion seems to be waiting for Sarah, as if it has something to reveal. The first nights in the mansion are bathed in a deceptive tranquility. But soon this tranquility is shattered by inexplicable noises, children's laughter and crying echoing through the empty corridors, emanating from nowhere and everywhere at once. Sarah, initially fascinated by these phenomena, begins to feel increasingly uneasy. Every night the sounds seem to gain in intensity, in desperation, calling out, perhaps to be heard, to be understood. Then the doll appears for the first time. Early in the morning, Sarah finds it sitting on a chair in the living room as if it had always been there. With its glassy, staring eyes and frozen smile, the doll exudes an aura of melancholy. Sarah is intrigued by this antique doll, whose presence in the mansion was not recorded in any inventory. She puts it back in its place, trying to ignore the unease it arouses. But the doll refuses to be ignored. It reappears night after night in different places, at the foot of Sarah's bed, on a windowsill overlooking the garden, in the library. Each appearance of the doll coincides with an intensification of the children's noises, weaving a veil of anguish and mystery around Sarah. Driven by a need to understand, Sarah dives into the mansion's archives, rummaging through diaries, letters, and forgotten photographs. She discovers the existence of a little girl, Charlotte, a member of the family who died in tragic circumstances over a century ago. Charlotte was inseparable from her doll, the same doll that now haunts Sarah. As one night follows another, the paranormal manifestations intensify, culminating in one night when everything changes. Sarah is awakened by the cries of a child in distress, cries that seem to emanate from the doll itself. Guided by an unknown force, she finds herself face to face with the doll, its glass eyes shining with an unearthly glow. It's then that the truth comes out. Charlotte's soul has been imprisoned in the doll, condemned to eternally relive her last night of despair. Sarah, guided by deep intuition and a desire to do the right thing, decides to confront the imprisoned soul directly. With an act of pure empathy and understanding, she hopes to break the bond that holds Charlotte captive in this world. One night, under a moonlit glow that bathes the mansion in a ghostly light, Sarah sits before the doll, her eyes plunged into the porcelain's glassy ones, and begins to speak softly, telling the doll stories of freedom and love, promising never to forget her, to keep her memory alive. However, as Sarah seeks to forge this empathetic bond, to offer Charlotte an escape through the strength of her compassion and humanity, a presence insinuates itself, cold and calculating. Charlotte's soul, or what's left of it, tortured by decades of loneliness and confusion, seizes this opportunity not to be freed, but to escape its confinement. In a moment of intense contact, a terrifying reversal occurs. Sarah feels her essence slipping away, carried away by an invisible force, a cold current that pulls her away from her body. The manor house, silent witness to this tragedy, suddenly falls silent, as if freed from an age-old burden. The doll, once the receptacle of Charlotte's soul, becomes Sarah's new prison. Her eyes, which once reflected life and curiosity, freeze into a porcelain gaze, capturing the horror of her final realization. She has become what she sought to save. The house regains a deceptive peace. The doll, with Sarah's eyes now locked in a motionless face, continues to watch over the deserted corridors. Its last human gaze, bearing witness to both horror and understanding, is now turned towards the entrance, silently welcoming those who dare to enter the mansion. In an old castle lived the Devereux, a French family whose wealth and power knew no bounds. But with greatness sometimes comes profound loneliness. The lord and lady of the castle wanted more than anything else in the world an heir to carry on their name. However, despite their prayers and efforts, fate remained cruel, their home desperately empty of children's laughter. One evening, as the lord wandered through the vast gardens, he heard crystalline laughter that seemed to dance in the air. Intrigued and guided by an inexplicable force, he followed these sounds until he discovered, to his amazement, a group of children playing under the branches of an old weeping willow. These supernaturally beautiful children, with their bright eyes and hair flowing in the wind, were playing as if the outside world didn't exist. The lord, moved by this scene, introduced himself and asked where they were from. But instead of an answer, he received only enigmatic smiles. Every evening, drawn by their innocence and joy, he returned to see them until he offered them a place to live at the castle, with all the comfort and security they deserved. The children accepted, and for a time the castle was filled with life and happiness. The Devereux, even though they knew deep down that these children were not theirs, found a certain comfort in their presence. But the happiness was short-lived. Strange things began to happen. Objects disappeared, inexplicable noises echoed in the night, and moving shadows watched each other out of the corner of their eyes. Local villagers recounted seeing children playing in the castle gardens long after sunset, even though the gates were closed and the walls impenetrable. One night, a terrible storm swept across the estate. The wind howled like a grief-stricken soul, and the rain beat down with unheard-of violence. In the morning, the lord and lady awoke to find that the children had disappeared, leaving behind only their wet clothes and scattered toys. The search was in vain. The children seemed to have vanished into thin air, swept away by the storm. The castle returned to its former silence. Years passed after the mysterious disappearance of the children, leaving Lord and Lady Devereux in a state of desolation and regret. The castle, once vibrant with laughter and life, was now a tomb of memories and silence. But the children's laughter, those ghostly echoes, never ceased. Night after night, they invited, tempted, and seduced the couple. One autumn evening, the couple, aged and haunted by the weight of loneliness, once again heard the children's laughter rising above the roar of the storm. It was as if time had not altered their joy, as if these voices belonged to the in-between worlds. Driven by a deep despair and perhaps a last hope of finding what they had lost, the lord and lady went out into the night, following the sounds to the far reaches of the gardens. They walked, called by the laughter, until they came to the edge of a part of the gardens they didn't recognize, a place where the shadows seemed to dance in a way that defied logic, where the moonlight couldn't pierce the veil of darkness. There, in the center, played the children, as real and unreal as the day they had disappeared. "Come and play with us, forever," they said, their voices a chorus of invitation and promise. With tears in their eyes, the old couple stepped forward, as if drawn by an irresistible force, their hearts beating with the mad hope that they would never be alone again. But no sooner had they taken the last few steps than the children turned into shadows, vanishing into the mist with laughter that rose to a terrifying cacophony. Lord and Lady Devereux were never seen again. The castle fell into ruin, shrouded in an aura of mystery and sadness. The laughter of children, however, still echoes, bearing witness to a tragic tale of desire and loss, luring lonely souls into the depths of darkness. And those who dare to venture into the castle gardens at night sometimes report seeing the silhouettes of an old couple, hand in hand, walking in search of fleeting happiness. The old Walshy home had always been shrouded in mystery and rumour. When Rachel Walshy, a young writer in search of inspiration, inherits her great-uncle's house, she has no idea of the dark secrets it hides. From the very first days, Rachel is intrigued by strange noises coming from the attic. Children's laughter, whispers and light footsteps, as if tiny feet were running across the dusty floor. Despite a slight apprehension, she decides to investigate, thinking that the noises could be caused by animals or the wind. One evening, driven by curiosity, Rachel climbed into the attic. There, in the sweltering darkness, she discovers not creatures or abandoned toys, but tiny footprints in the dust, and more strangely, 2 pairs of children's shoes, neatly laid, side by side. Intrigued and slightly frightened, she begins to rummage through old family journals and photographs left around the house. She learns that the great-uncle she had never really known had twins who had died tragically in the house during their childhood. The cause of their death was never clearly explained, only mentioned as an unexpected tragedy in yellowed newspaper clippings. The noises in the attic begin to take on a new and terrifying meaning for Rachel. Every night, the manifestations become more intense. Rachel now hears children's voices calling her by name, inviting her to play with them in the attic. One evening, the voices lead her to an old wooden chest hidden under dusty sheets. Inside, she finds vintage toys and a diary belonging to one of the twins, in which it is written that their father, consumed by grief and madness after the death of his wife, had locked them up in the attic, leaving them to starve. Horrified, but determined to appease the children's spirits, Rachel decides to give the toys and other childhood mementos a proper burial, hoping that this will enable the twins to find rest. But just as she touches the diary, an invisible force pushes her violently to the ground. Lights flicker, doors slam, and the shrill cries of children fill the air. Rachel realizes that she has been deceived. The twins aren't looking for rest. They want someone to replace their eternal loneliness. Trying to escape from the attic, Rachel stumbles and falls heavily, hitting her head on the floor. The last sounds she hears before losing consciousness are the children's mischievous laughter. When she wakes up, Rachel finds herself locked in the attic. She tries to scream, to bang on the walls, but her voice seems to be absorbed by the darkness. As the days go by, she realizes that she has become the new occupant of the attic, the twins' new plaything, condemned to share their fate. Eleanor, a recently married young woman, inherits the old family home, a stately Victorian mansion isolated on the outskirts of a small rural town. She and her husband, Michael, move into the house, attracted by its antique charm and rich history. Among the antique furnishings, one object in particular catches her eye: an elegant, finely crafted rocking chair, prominently placed in front of the living room fireplace. The couple soon learn that the armchair belonged to Eleanor's great-grandmother, a matriarch feared for her strict nature and rigid control over the family. According to family legend, she spent hours in the chair, often in the middle of the night, allegedly lulling the spirit of her late husband. Soon after they move in, strange things begin to happen. The armchair begins to rock gently on its own, especially at night, when the wind whistles through the cracks in the old mansion. At first, Michael and Eleanor attribute these movements to air currents or the instability of the floor, but the activity intensifies, becoming too coordinated to be the result of chance. On nights when arguments break out between the couple, the chair begins to sway more vigorously, as if reacting to negative emotions. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, Eleanor, alone in the living room, sees the armchair rocking furiously. Suddenly, a cold, authoritative female voice emanates from the armchair, repeating phrases that Eleanor's great-grandmother used to scold her children. Terrified but fascinated, Eleanor begins to investigate her family history, uncovering diaries and letters that reveal the oppressive and sometimes cruel nature of the great-grandmother. These discoveries lead her to suspect that the spirit of the former matriarch may be linked to the chair, feeding its energy into family conflicts. Determined to put an end to this haunting, Eleanor consults a paranormal expert who suggests a séance to communicate with the spirit and enable her to move on. The session is held on a full moon night, amplifying the energies present. During the séance, the air becomes charged with a palpable electricity. The armchair sways frantically, and great-grandmother's voice becomes clearer, shouting orders and expressing her refusal to leave the house. In a terrifying climax, as the expert attempts to banish the spirit, a shocking revelation occurs. The spirit is not that of the great-grandmother, but that of her husband, locked up and tortured by the matriarch even after his death, using the chair as a means of controlling and dominating the family, even in the afterlife. The session ends abruptly when the chair stops rocking and a heavy silence falls over the room. Eleanor and Michael believe that the spirit has been released, but as the days go by, the chair begins to rock again, more gently, suggesting that something else remains attached to the house, perhaps part of the tortured soul of the husband, now free from his wife's domination, but still not at peace. Located in the heart of a vast, abandoned estate, the garden of the Everson mansion concealed a singular secret. Exquisitely beautiful statues, so lifelike they seemed on the verge of awakening. Thomas Everson, heir to the house, was fascinated by these works of art. Sculpted by an artist and mystic ancestor, these statues represented members of his family through the ages, each capturing the essence of its model with uncanny precision. Thomas, a lonely young man at heart, found solace in the silent company of these stone figures. He would spend hours wandering among them, imagining the stories and lives of these petrified ancestors. But as the days grew shorter and the shadows longer, an imperceptible change began to take place in the garden. The statues, once frozen in eternity, seemed to change position when he wasn't looking at them, their expressions evolving subtly with the passage of time. Concerned but captivated, Thomas began to investigate the history of these creations and discovered his ancestor's diary, revealing the true nature of the statues. Not works of art, but stone prisons for the Everson souls, designed to contain their essence eternally. Horrified by this revelation, Thomas tried to break the curse, to free his ancestors from their confinement. But each attempt only aggravated the situation as the statues became more animated, their nocturnal movements bolder, their expressions imbued with anger and despair. Murmurs began to fill the garden as night fell, pleading voices mixed with cries of rage as the statues closed in on the house, encircling Thomas in a silent siege. The garden, once a place of beauty and contemplation, had become a theatre of horror, each statue a living reminder of the Everson curse. One full moon night, Thomas, in despair, realized that the only way to end the curse was to join his ancestors, to become a statue himself, in the hope of appeasing their wrath and freeing future generations from the family burden. In a final act of sacrifice, Thomas placed himself in the center of the garden under the stony gaze of his ancestors and recited the final incantation found in the diary. As the words escaped his lips, An unearthly glow enveloped the garden, the statues resuming their places, their expressions becoming peaceful for the first time in centuries. By sunrise, the garden was once again a haven of peace, the statues motionless, their curse appeased. But at the centre of the garden, a new statue now stood, that of Thomas, his features frozen in a mixture of resolution and sadness, watching over the Everson estate for eternity. Nightfall Castle, perched on a cliff overlooking the tumultuous ocean, has been the scene of many dark events over the centuries. Its walls, built with ambition and grandeur, now contain echoes of a tortured past. It's against this backdrop that our story comes to life, with the arrival of Eleanor, a young historian with a passion for ancient legends and curses. Attracted by the mysteries of Nightfall Castle, Elena decides to spend the night there, armed with her recorder and her thirst for knowledge. The first part of her visit goes smoothly, capturing the sound of her footsteps echoing through the empty corridors and the wind whistling through the cracks. But as the night progresses, an oppressive atmosphere takes hold. Elena begins to sense an ominous presence. As she explores a former banqueting hall, her gaze is drawn to an anomaly on the wall. Hands, or rather handprints, seem to emerge from the stone, their contours blurred but undeniably human. Fascinated and horrified, Elena approaches, reaching out to touch the prints, but stops herself at the last moment. The night grows darker and the phenomena intensify. Whispers fill the air, desperate pleas that seem to emanate from the walls themselves. Elena realizes that these hands are those of victims of an ancient tragedy, lost souls seeking to escape their stone prison. Driven by a will beyond her own curiosity, Elena decides to follow the whispers which lead her to the castle's dungeons. There, in the suffocating darkness, the truth reveals itself to her. Nightfall Castle was the scene of cruel justice, where the accused were walled up alive, their hands left protruding as a final act of desperation. Driven by a mysterious force, far beyond mere curiosity or academic ambition, Elena felt irrevocably drawn to the depths of Nightfall Castle. The whispers, at first perceived as the wind caressing the old walls, turned into distinct calls, inviting her, guiding her towards the castle's dark dungeons. These forgotten corridors, where daylight had never penetrated, concealed the castle's darkest secrets. It was in this stifling atmosphere, where the air seemed charged with despair and ancestral fear, that Elena discovered the terrifying truth about Nightfall. The castle had not only been the seat of nobility and power, but also the scene of unimaginably cruel justice. The accused, judged according to criteria now incomprehensible, were condemned to a fate worse than death. Walled up alive in the bowels of the castle, their hands left protruding from the walls as a final act of desperation and pleading for mercy. Horrified but fascinated, Elena couldn't take her eyes or her mind off these revelations. With determination tinged with growing fear, she recorded every whisper, every cry muffled by the stones, capturing the voices of the condemned, their tragic stories and eternal regrets. But as she immersed herself deeper into Nightfall's bloody history, an invisible, imperious force seized her. She felt herself being pulled, drawn towards the wall by more defined, spectral hands that emerged with a will of their own, firmly gripping her arms, her shoulders, pulling her towards them with an unearthly, desperate force. In that moment of pure terror, the horror of her situation crystallized in Elena's mind. A chilling epiphany pierced her. The walled spirits weren't just seeking to be heard or freed from their stony confinement. They longed to complete their ranks, to draw another soul into their eternal purgatory, to share their loneliness and despair. Their cries, mingled with dread and supplication, echoed through the dungeons, a macabre melody for ears that would never exist to hear them. When dawn finally broke through the darkness, bringing a pale, uncertain light to the lands surrounding Nightfall, a group of researchers, drawn by the legends and tales left by Elena, cautiously entered the dungeons. What they found was an oppressive silence, an emptiness that spoke louder than words ever could. On the cold floor of the dungeon lay Elena's recorder, abandoned, her last will printed on the magnetic tapes. The last entries, a horrifying mix of screams of terror and the pleas of the condemned, formed an oral epitaph to Elena's tragedy. Nothing remained of her, not even a shadow, except a new pair of hands emerging from the wall, one next to the others, in silent anticipation of the next victim, a new chapter in the cursed legend of Nightfall. Our story takes place in Blackwood Manor, an ancestral home with a vast and mysterious library at its heart. The manor house held secrets that even previous generations had chosen to ignore. Jonathan, fascinated by his family history and the legends surrounding the manor, decided that the library would be his sanctuary, a place of solitude in which to write his next novel. But what he found in this room was beyond the darkest imagination. Soon after he moved in, strange noises began to disturb the silence of the house. Slow, measured footsteps echoed through the library as night fell, as if someone or something were roaming its aisles, leafing through the pages of ancient books. Jonathan, intrigued at first, then gradually terrified, began to investigate these manifestations. Night after night, he posted himself at the entrance to the library, watching and listening. The footsteps seemed to have no source or direction, wandering aimlessly between the shelves. One night, however, a chilling discovery revealed the source of these nocturnal wanderings. Jonathan found an old diary hidden behind a series of books on the occult, belonging to a distant ancestor, Albert Blackwood. Albert, obsessed with the afterlife and communicating with spirits, had turned the library into a sanctuary for his experiments. The pages of the diary detailed rituals and invocations, a desperate quest to break the barrier between worlds. But the last entry in the diary was a warning against a presence he had accidentally unleashed, an entity that sought not to communicate, but to consume. Over the following nights, the footsteps grew louder, closer, as if the entity were gaining strength, feeding on Jonathan's fear. Whispers joined the footsteps, inhuman voices whispering forgotten secrets, terrifying truths about the Blackwood family and the price of their ambitions. Jonathan, realizing that his presence in the mansion had awakened an ancient evil force, tried to find a way to send the entity back to where it came from. He plunged into research, studying Albert's diary and occult texts, looking for a solution in the ancient rituals described by his ancestor. But the entity was more malignant, more ancient than anything Jonathan could imagine. It played with him, guiding him through a labyrinth of lies and half-truths. And when Jonathan thought he'd found the ritual to banish it, he realized, too late, that he'd been manipulated, leading the entity not into exile, but into total liberation from its chains. The library became the scene of a final confrontation, with shadows dancing around Jonathan, their footsteps sounding like the drumbeat of fate. In a last, desperate act, Jonathan completed the ritual, but instead of banishing the entity, he sealed his own fate. The shadows engulfed him, footsteps stopped, and the library returned to its oppressive silence. When the next heirs to Blackwood Manor opened the library, all they found were shelves of dusty books and a silence heavy with secrets. No trace remained of Jonathan except for a diary lying on the desk, its pages blank except for a final entry written in a trembling hand. Don't listen to them. Don't follow the footsteps. In the heart of a small English village lies an old well, so old that no one remembers when it was built. The village elders whisper that it is as old as time itself, a passageway between the world of the living and that of the dead. Newcomers to the village are quickly warned. Never approach the well at nightfall and never seek to discover its secrets. For, according to legend, the well does not give water, but offers a glimpse of wandering souls trapped in their eternal regrets. One autumn evening, as the wind whistled through the bare trees and the mist thickened, enveloping everything in a veil of darkness, a young man named Ethan, new to the village and skeptical of local superstitions, decided to defy the warnings. Driven by curiosity and a certain personal challenge, he made his way to the well under cover of night. "Show me your secrets, well of souls," he murmured as he approached the edge, lamp in hand. He bent down to peer into the depths, hoping to see his reflection or perhaps the bottom, but instead he met the gaze of pale, tormented faces that seemed to float in the black water, their mouths open in a mute scream. Terrified, but unable to look away, Ethan saw the faces change, revealing past lives, tragic deaths, souls begging to be freed from their watery prison. Each face told a story of horror, sorrow, and unimaginable despair. Then the waters began to swirl, forming a dark vortex that seemed to beckon, inviting him to join the lost souls. In a fit of terror, Ethan stumbled backwards, tripping over a root hidden by the mist. He fell backwards, his lamp escaping from his hand and extinguishing itself on contact with the damp ground. The wind picked up, carrying with it the whispering voices of the souls in the well, begging him to free them, to join them. Ethan rose to his feet, panic pulsing through his veins, and ran towards the village, never looking back. The silent cries of souls pursued him, wrapping around him like the cold fingers of death. Back home, he locked all the doors, barricaded the windows, and spent a sleepless night, startled at the slightest noise, convinced that the souls from the well were coming for him. But when the sun rose, bringing with it light and some form of respite, Ethan convinced himself that he'd only been a victim of his imagination. However, the following days brought a series of inexplicable and terrifying events. Shadows moved just around the corner of his vision, inaudible whispers woke him at night, and sometimes he swore he felt the icy dampness of the well enveloping him, even locked in his house. Terror took root in his mind, each day a little deeper, each night a little darker. Ethan realized that he hadn't just glimpsed the souls in the well, he'd released them, or worse, been marked by them. Marked to be the next, to join the dark, icy depths of the Well of Souls. The last time Ethan was seen, he was walking towards the well, his eyes empty, as if called by an irresistible force. He murmured something inaudible, a farewell or perhaps a supplication, before disappearing into the morning mist, leaving behind only whispers and the memory of a cursed curiosity. The Well of Souls continues to stand in the centre of the village, a silent monument to past mistakes and ignored warnings. Villagers avoid its grasp, but sometimes, in the silence of the night, voices can be heard, as if the well were calling, seeking its next visitor, its next soul to be imprisoned in its dark, bottomless waters. And you, dear listener, do you dare look into the depths? Or will you listen to the warnings left by the souls of those who have been too curious? Remember, some things are best left unexplored, some secrets best kept in the dark, and some souls best left to rest in the depths of the well of souls. Isabel, a young musicologist with a passion for the melodies of the past, receives an intriguing invitation to study ancient scores found in the archives of a recently restored castle. The castle, built on the ruins of a medieval monastery, is renowned for its legends and mysteries, including tales of melancholy songs escaping from its underground passages at night. Intrigued and drawn by the prospect of discovering lost compositions, Isabel arrives at the castle, greeted by the echo of her own footsteps echoing on the cold stone. The atmosphere is heavy, steeped in history. She's led to the underground tunnels where the scores were found, a labyrinth of vaults and narrow corridors reaching deep into the earth. On the very first night, as Isabel explores the scores by the light of a storm lamp, a soft, almost imperceptible melody begins to float through the dark corridors, a composition of sad, haunting beauty. Isabel, captivated, follows the sound, descending ever deeper into the underground maze. On subsequent nights, the songs become clearer, more insistent. Each melody seems to tell a story, echoes of a time when the monastery was full of life, prayer and music. But each song also carries a tinge of infinite sadness, of despair. Driven by a growing obsession, Isabel began recording and transcribing the melodies, trying to decipher their origin and meaning. As her research progresses, Isabel discovers that the songs are attributed to a monk composer from the monastery, Brother Alaric, who legend has it was walled up alive in the underground after succumbing to heretical visions. The songs, Isabel thinks, may be his work, messages from the past captured within the walls of this place. But as the pieces of the puzzle come together, the manifestations become darker, more menacing. The chants become supplications, muffled cries. The underground seems to close in around Isabel, the shadows lengthening as if to seize her. She realizes that the melodies are not mere echoes of the past, but expressions of Brother Alaric's tormented soul, trapped within these walls. One night, as a storm rages outside, Isabel, determined to free the monk's spirit, travels to the deepest part of the underground tunnels where she believes Alaric has been walled up. There, the chanting reaches its climax, a crescendo of pain and rage. In a moment of sheer terror, as she attempts to destroy the wall behind which Alaric is believed to be confined, Isabel is suddenly swept away by an invisible force, absorbed into the darkness, her voice mingling with the eternal chants of the underground. The next day, the castle is calm again, but no trace of Isabel remains, except for her recorder, found on the underground floor. The last notes recorded are a mixture of the melancholy songs and Isabel's voice, now an integral part of the castle legend, condemned to sing with Alaric for eternity in the depths of the underground. The next story begins in the ruins of an abandoned manor house. At the heart of this mansion lies a hidden room, walled off for centuries, which local legends say is cursed. At the center of this room lies a hauntingly beautiful mirror, its gilded frame adorned with precious stones and ancient symbols, a relic of a time when magic and mystery reigned supreme. This mirror, according to the tales, shows not the present but possible futures, revealing to those who dare to look into it the moments of happiness, sadness, or more often sheer terror that await them. But the mirror comes at a price. For every vision plucked from its depths comes with a curse. Changing one's destiny is impossible, and attempting to do so can lead to consequences far worse than the reality initially predicted. It was in this atmosphere, heavy with secrets, that Sarah, a young woman fascinated by the paranormal and urban legends, discovered the existence of the Mirror of Destiny. Driven by a thirst for knowledge of her future and armed with naive courage, she decided to defy the warnings and seek out the mirror. One moonlit night, Sarah entered the mansion, her footsteps echoing through the silent corridors, her heart beating in unison with the whispers of forgotten spirits. She found the hidden room behind a wall that seemed to yield to the simple pressure of her will, as if the mansion itself were inviting her in. Facing the mirror, Sarah felt a shiver run through her body. The air around her became charged with an electric energy, and the mirror fogged over before slowly clearing, revealing not her reflection, but a series of visions that followed one another with dizzying rapidity. She saw moments of pure joy, laughter and celebration, but these were quickly swallowed up by scenes of unimaginable horror. The loss of her loved ones, terrible accidents, and herself trapped in a dark and lonely fate. Paralyzed by fear, but unable to look away, Sarah watched helplessly as her future was revealed to her. When she was finally able to break the spell binding her to the mirror, she found herself alone, trembling, a deep-seated terror rooted in her soul. She realized that the mirror hadn't simply informed her of her future. It had changed her, leaving an invisible mark that would forever alter her perception of the world. Days and months passed, and Sarah tried to shake off the grip of what she'd seen, to rationalize the visions as illusions born of fear and darkness. But fate has an insidious way of reminding us. The events she had glimpsed began to unfold, one by one, each realization dragging her deeper into an abyss of despair. She tried to change the course of events, to thwart the macabre predictions, but each attempt only accelerated her fall towards the inevitable conclusion the mirror had revealed. The curse of the mirror was real. By seeking to know her future, she had sealed her fate. The final vision, the most terrifying of all, was drawing inexorably closer. Sarah, consumed by fear and regret, realized that she could not escape her fate. The mirror, with its cruel promise of knowledge, had offered a vision of the future that was both a gift and a death trap. In a final act of desperation, Sarah returned to the manor determined to destroy the mirror, hoping to break the chain of events that bound her to her doomed future. But the mirror, the reflection of souls and destinies, would not be broken so easily. Facing her own reflection for the first time, Sarah saw not her own face, but that of many other victims, trapped in the dark depths of the glass, their eyes pleading for release or perhaps warning of the dangers of forbidden knowledge. The true horror of the Mirror of Destiny lies not in the visions it shows, but in the realization that certain fates are inevitable, and that knowledge of the future is a far greater curse than ignorance. Sarah, and those like her who seek to see beyond the veil, discover that the price of curiosity may be the soul itself, lost forever in the reflections of an unchanging future. Nathan, a young filmmaker in search of inspiration for his next horror film, decides to isolate himself in an old country house inherited from his aunt, who died a few years earlier. From the moment he arrives, Nathan is captivated by the solemnity of the house. The old woodwork, the portraits of the ancestors with their penetrating gazes, and above all, a door in the basement, sealed for years and covered with strange symbols. This becomes a source of inspiration for his writing. But soon, strange phenomena begin to appear. At night, voices whisper through the walls, almost imperceptible whispers that seem to emanate from behind the sealed door. Nathan begins to investigate the history of the house. He discovers that the house once belonged to a scholar obsessed with the occult who used the basement as a sanctuary for mysterious rituals. The sealed door, according to the scholar's diaries, was used to contain something he had summoned, something too dangerous to release. Over the following nights, the whispers behind the door become clearer, more insistent. Nathan can now make out phrases, cries for help, pleas to be freed. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier, a feeling of constant scrutiny weighing on Nathan, watching him from every dark corner. One evening, determined to discover the truth and use this frightening experience for his novel, Nathan decides to break the seal and open the door. Armed with a flashlight and a tape recorder, he removes the barricades, ignoring the warnings engraved on the wood. Just as the door opens, a cold wind blows out, carrying with it a blood-curdling howl. Nathan, paralyzed with fear, shines his lamp inside, revealing a room filled with occult symbols and old grimoires strewn about. In the center, a large black mirror, framed by rusty chains, reflects not his own image, but that of a dark entity, its eyes burning with malice. The voice, now clear and authoritative, taunts Nathan, revealing that the door was not there to contain the entity, but to protect the outside world from it. As Nathan recoils in horror, the entity in the mirror begins to escape, its dark form spilling into the room. Nathan, realizing his fatal error, tries to close the door, but it's too late. The entity, freed after decades, envelops Nathan, absorbing his essence, leaving him an empty shell, a mere spectator behind the door he had opened. The house regains its calm, silence returning to the surrounding woods. Nathan, now a prisoner behind the door he had so unwisely opened, becomes the new voice, whispering warnings through the cracks, hoping that the next visitor will show more wisdom. In the heart of a small village lost in the mountains stands an old inn with old-fashioned charm. But behind its picturesque appearance lies a sinister secret: the cold room. In this village, where time seems to have stood still, the inn stands like a vestige of the past, its heavy stone walls imbued with an atmosphere heavy with mystery. Few guests or locals dare to mention Room 13, nicknamed the Cold Room. When Sophie, an intrepid traveller in search of adventure, arrives at the inn, she is drawn in by the enigmatic tales surrounding this room. Despite whispered warnings and worried looks from the villagers, Sophie asks to stay there, eager to discover the truth behind the rumours. As soon as she sets foot in the room, Sophie feels an icy presence, an uneasy feeling that creeps into her bones. The walls seem to whisper forgotten secrets, and the shadows dance in a way that defies rational explanation. On her first night, Sophie is awakened by strange noises that seem to come from deep inside the room. An intense cold envelops the room, making even the warmest bones shiver. The walls seem to be closing in, suffocating, threatening. Intrigued and frightened, Sophie begins to investigate the history of the inn. She discovers that decades ago, a horrible crime was allegedly committed in the cold room. A crime so atrocious that the villagers decided to condemn it forever. But as Sophie delves deeper into the inn's dark past, she realizes that the horror isn't limited to a single nightmare. Inexplicable things are happening all around her, and faceless shadows seem to be stalking her through the inn's dark corridors. In a last-ditch effort to unravel the mystery of the cold room, Sophie decides to stay an extra night. But what she discovers is beyond anything she could have imagined. In the darkest recesses of the room, she finds macabre clues, evidence of an ancestral evil that continues to haunt the inn. As dawn breaks over the sleepy village, Sophie escapes from the inn, her mind tormented by the horrors she has seen. But even away from the inn, she still feels the icy cold of the cold room, chilling her blood. A sinister presence that continues to haunt her, even in her deepest dreams. In the weeks that follow, Sophie finds herself haunted by terrifying nightmares, visions of the inn and its dark secrets. She is unable to shake off the sense of oppression that enveloped her in the cold room. Has the darkness of the inn marked her forever? Only time will tell. Julie, a young journalist in search of a thrill, arrives at the Hotel Foresta in the dead of winter. She's heard about the intriguing history of this dark and remote place and is determined to uncover the truth behind its ancient walls. The welcome at the hotel is warm on the surface, but Julie soon senses a heavy atmosphere. Guests seem nervous, staff avoid her gaze, and an aura of mystery hangs in the air. When Julie asks to explore the hotel, she is surprised to discover a strange corridor at the end of the lobby, one that seems to stretch endlessly into darkness. Despite the mute warnings of the staff, she decides to enter it, eager to discover the secrets that lurk there. As soon as she stepped into the corridor, Julie felt a strange sensation of vertigo. The walls seem to twist and warp, the doors open onto empty, abandoned rooms, and the oppressive silence weighs heavily on her shoulders. The further Julie travels, the more the corridor seems to expand, as if it were constantly expanding, taking her further and further away from reality. The hours seem to expand, the days to blur, and Julie loses all sense of direction in this endless labyrinth. As she wanders down the corridor, Julie begins to hear indistinct murmurs, whispers coming from nowhere. Shadows crept stealthily into the dark corners, indistinct figures that disappeared as soon as she tried to approach them. After days of wandering the corridor, Julie finally discovers a surprising clue to the strange nature of this place. In an abandoned room, she finds an old diary belonging to a former owner of the hotel. The yellowing pages of the diary reveal the disturbing history of the Hotel Foresta. The place was once an abandoned mental asylum where patients were subjected to horrific experiments in an attempt to unravel the mysteries of the human mind. Julie is horrified to discover that the endless corridor is in fact far more sinister than she could have imagined. It is a manifestation of the unspeakable suffering, torment, and madness of the patients who were once confined there, condemned to eternal reliving of their darkest nightmares. Every step she takes in this gloomy corridor seems to push her further into an abyss of terror and despair. The walls creak and groan, as if alive, and Julie feels as if she is being watched by invisible eyes, malevolent presences lurking in the darkness. As she moves forward, Julie is assailed by terrifying visions of her own past. Painful memories and regrets that have haunted her for years suddenly resurface, threatening to overwhelm her under their unbearable weight. She fights to keep her sanity intact, to avoid succumbing to the madness lurking in the oppressive shadow of the endless corridor. Every moment spent in this cursed place seems like an eternity. Every second, a desperate struggle to escape its all-consuming grip. But Julie refuses to let herself be swallowed up by the darkness that surrounds her. With fierce determination, she reaches deep inside herself to find the strength to break the infernal circle of the endless corridor. Finally, after a bitter struggle, Julie manages to escape from the Hotel Foresta, leaving behind the dark secrets that haunt its tortuous corridors. She thinks she has finally found peace, but she is sorely mistaken. In the days following her departure from the hotel, Julie is plagued by terrifying nightmares of the endless corridor. Gloomy voices whisper in the darkness. Menacing shadows pursue her in her deepest dreams. She realizes with horror that the endless corridor has never really let her go. It continues to haunt her, to torment her, to draw her inexorably towards the abyss of madness. Julie realizes that her nightmare is far from over. She is condemned to wander for eternity through the tortuous maze of her own psyche, trapped forever in the darkness of her own mind. So ends Julie's story, a story of terror and madness, a story that reminds us that sometimes the most frightening demons are those that reside within ourselves, waiting patiently in the shadows of our souls to engulf us in an endless abyss. Tonight, you've heard stories, ancient legends, whispers by the fireside, secrets whispered behind the walls of this dwelling. But who can tell what was born of truth and what was woven by the thread of illusion? Perhaps, after all, there's a hidden truth in every shadow we've touched tonight. I wish you a night filled with the thrills that only good terror can offer. May your dreams be filled with these stories, true or not, and may uncertainty keep you awake, just enough to perceive the shudder of secrets hidden in the darkness. I sincerely hope our paths cross again on another night of stories. Who knows what other unspoken truths might then be revealed beneath the veil of mystery. With these words, I leave you, not without a final thought. Keep an open mind, for the world is old, mysterious, and yes, perhaps horrifyingly real. Good night, my friends, and beware of what lurks in the shadows.